the only alternative I have right now.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Foreign Minister, I'd like to ask what is Russia's view on the Brazilian-Chinese initiative of trying to foster a group of countries to discuss a peace process in Ukraine. The group last met in New York in September.
A bit louder.
The group last met in September in New York, but ever since we've had an election in the United States, we are seeing an escalation in Ukraine with the decision of the U.S. to allow the use of long-range missiles to hit Russian territory. So under these circumstances, I'd like to ask what is Russia's views of this Brazilian-Chinese initiative? It still makes sense for both countries to pursue a initiative in this sense. Thank you.
Well, on the decision of the United States to allow Ukrainian regime to use missiles up to 300 kilometers long, we read what the New York Times published about this. There are still no confirmation either from the White House or from the Pentagon, but we basically take our position on the basis of what is going on physically. And physically attackams, apparently not as long as 300 kilometers, are being used, including this early morning in Russia, against the Bryansk Oblast of Russia, which is bordering Ukraine, and we proceed from the understanding that this is happening, and that any modification of ATACMS cannot be used without American experts and instructors, including satellite data, including programming and targeting. The President mentioned this several times. If long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory, it will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly. As regards Trump's position on Ukraine, I cannot guess. He said that he is a president of peace, not the president of war. Politicians in particular, who declare that they prefer peace to war, deserve support, I think, in general. It's like Brazil and China, they want peace. And this intention we can only welcome. As regards the practical activities of this group of friends, it met only once in September, and the meeting was about announcing about the creation of this group. Now they are planning to convene the first meeting in November in New York. I talked to the Chinese minister yesterday. We would follow these activities. We would expect this group to take into account the initiative of Chairman Xi Jinping of February 2023. It was global security initiative, not about Ukraine, not about Palestine, generic approach to any conflict. And one of the key rules which was formulated in that global security initiative was, in any conflict, look first to the root causes and concentrate on eliminating those root causes. So I assume that since China is co-sponsor with Brazil of this group of friends, and since Chinese leader initiated this global security document, which insists on the need to remove the root causes of any conflict, that this would be applied to the Ukrainian initiative by China and Brazil. And the root causes, of course, the attempts to undermine security interests of Russia by pulling Ukraine into NATO and building NATO infrastructure just on our borders, And the second root cause, after the coup d'etat in 2014 in February, next morning after a deal was signed by the president, the then president and the opposition, they staged the coup, and Germany, France and Poland, who guaranteed the deal, when we told them, you must stop this, gentlemen, they said, well, sometimes democracy takes unexpected twist. So they did support the coup. And since then, the regime which came to power in this illegitimate way passed series of laws starting from 2017, long before the special military operation became inevitable. Legislation exterminating legally any Russian education, any Russian media outlets, any Russian cultural presence in Ukraine, and recently they prohibited canonic Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And this is all against the demand of the UN Charter in Article 1 to respect human rights of all, irrespective of race, gender, language or religion. So Article 1 of the Charter is grossly, rudely violated by the Kiev regime. And the West, which is concerned about human rights even when you discuss some biological diversity, they shut up about this particular situation when the regime of their Russian, if you wish, is doing things which violate the key interests of each and every person. People who citizens of Ukraine, all of them are deprived, and all of them, most of them are much more comfortable in Russian than in any other language, and they are deprived of these rights. And when we draw attention of the West to these unacceptable violations, they don't respond at all. And Ursula von der Leyen, whom I mentioned too often today, she said that we must support Zelensky because he defends European values. If European values is racism, which is what is going on regarding the Russian culture and Russian people, then I'm not very optimistic about the future of such a Europe. So we hope that the Chinese-Brazilian initiative would be taken into account, because it mentions the need to implement the Charter and to be guided by the UN Charter. I discussed it with our friends, and I hope that when they are going to develop some roadmap, if they are planning this, that they will take into account the principles of the UN Charter in their entirety and interrelation, because otherwise it will be the Western position. The West takes from the Charter, when we discuss Ukraine, only one principle: territorial integrity. They forget about right of people for self-determination, and it is exactly this principle, respect for right for self-determination, which was the legal basis for decolonization. In fact, colonial rulers did not represent the people they ruled. They exploited them and exploited the natural resources of the lands on which these people live. And the people decided that you're not my boss. We want to be independent, and we want to have rulers who would be acceptable to us. Something like this is happening in Ukraine, because the regime cannot represent the people whose language, cultural, access to information, religious rights, they exterminated by law. And the same attitude we see, I think there is some similarity between decolonization and what the people of East and West, East and South of Ukraine, Donbass and Novorossiya, what they feel about Kiev regime. They do not accept legality of this regime. And the regime is anti-Russian. Russian meaning also citizens of Ukraine. When Zelensky, before the special operation in 2021, when the Minsk agreements were still alive, but Ukraine was fighting against the line of contact, and when he was asked in an interview by some Western correspondent what he thought about the people of Donbass on the other side of the line of contact, Zelensky said, "You call them people. There are people and there are species." That's what he said. The previous, the gentleman who was once prime minister of this putschist government after the coup, he was calling the people who rejected the coup subhumans, and so on and so forth. And they publicly were bragging that they will eliminate Russians legally and physically. This is the quotation from representative of the office of Zelensky. So like in colonial rule, the Kiev regime does not represent huge portion of the people which it used to consider as citizens of Ukraine and who decided at a referenda to come back to the Russian Federation. Yes, and speaking of Chinese-Brazilian initiative, we were slightly surprised when we learned that France and Switzerland were invited to be present as observers. France, as we just discovered, is not discovered, reiterated once again, is in the lead of the war through Ukraine against the Russian Federation, and Switzerland is not neutral for a long time. It is not very, I think, logical and promising that, yes, we were told by our Chinese and Brazilian friends that they would be just observing without the right to speak, but they would be part of the process in any way. So we raise these concerns, and we don't think it is necessary for the purpose of uniting global South to promote the peace in Ukraine.
It's 11 a.m. and the press conference lasts 1 hour due to schedule, so probably we have time for one question. Please, President Global.
Good morning, Mr. Minister Lavrov here from.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm from newspaper O Globo here in Brazil, and I would like to ask you: G7 countries press for a tougher statement here in G20 about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and I would like to know Russians' opinion about this statement and the last-minute decision to include the word infrastructure in this statement to be accepted for the countries.
What was the first question? Can you speak louder?
Yes, this is not working. The G7 countries pressed a lot Brazil to make a tougher statement in the G20 about the war between Russia and Ukraine. In the last minute, the word infrastructure were included, and they were pleased about that.
Okay.
I would like to know what Russia thinks about this statement and this word infrastructure. And if I may, about this decree that we knew today about the nuclear doctrine in Russia, should the world be prepared for a nuclear response from Russia after the U.S. decision this weekend and the first attack today?
Well, on the second question, we are strongly in favor of doing everything not to allow nuclear war to happen. It was us who first, during the Soviet Union times, suggested to the United States, and President Gorbachev and President Reagan made a joint statement that nuclear war can never be won and never must be started. The same statement we reconfirmed in January 2021 in the format of P5. All P5 confirmed this. When the Ukrainian war against Russia by the West started, quite a number of politicians in the West were assuming that there might be a nuclear element in this war. Liz Truss, who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, when she was asked whether she would be ready to press the red button, she said, yes, this is Prime Minister's obligation and duty. People in Germany, the Chief of Staff of the German Army, was quoted as saying that Russia must understand that NATO is a nuclear alliance. In France, Macron and his officials repeatedly were mentioning this. And of course, many other European politicians. We never started this conversation. And the update of the military doctrine does not add anything which the West wouldn't know, and does not add anything which would be different, let me put it this way, from the American doctrinal documents on what to do with nuclear weapons. We are convinced that the nuclear weapon is first and foremost a weapon to constrain any, prevent any nuclear war. This is how we handle this situation, and the West is a bit less honest, I would say, and it's really shocking to see that every now and then Japan introduces a resolution to the General Assembly which says that we have to commemorate the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Never ever this resolution mentions who did it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japanese textbooks at schools and universities, the chapter about summer of 1945 starts with the phrase nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, full stop, period. The Soviet Union enters into the war. The Americans never apologized. This is also sending a very wrong message to the current debates about nuclear weapons. We are in the front line, in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, and in the International Atomic Energy Agency, defending the world which would not be threatened by nuclear weapons. And the declaration which we adopted at G20 summit clearly says that we want to move towards the world free of nuclear weapons. This is our position. As regards the word infrastructure added to the generic paragraph which calls to be in line with international law, international humanitarian law, human rights law during any conflict. And it specially mentions that it is unacceptable to hurt civilians or civilian infrastructure. This was added. And then the text of this section of the declaration speaks about Palestine, and after that a small paragraph on Ukraine, which welcomes any peaceful initiatives. Infrastructure in this context means that we condemn elimination of social infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, what have you, practically entire social infrastructure in Gaza is non-existent. And of course, apart from social infrastructure, there are other forms of civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure. And we will insist, using this declaration in particular, that the terrorist attack against Nord Stream gas pipelines coming from Russia to Germany, which were blown up in September 2 years ago, that this declaration is one of the arguments which we will use to ensure that the investigation is transparent. So far, the Germans and other Western countries who started investigation, they don't share any results. And many American representatives and the Foreign Minister of Poland were publicly saying that this is something which the West should applaud because the United States did this to undermine Russia's influence. So this infrastructure is also important.